For 30 years, Rodney Dangerfield never told anyone the truth. Then, on The Tonight Show, his voice trembled and Johnny Carson stopped his monologue and stood up from his desk. It was March 1981. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank. Another Thursday night. Rodney Dangerfield was scheduled as the second guest, a reliable choice. Rodney always killed. His routine was bulletproof, the tight tug, the bulging eyes, the rapid-fire one-liners about getting no respect. Audiences loved him. Johnny loved him. Rodney had been on the show 47 times. This would be number 48. But something was different tonight. The show opened normally. Johnny's monologue landed perfectly. Jokes about Reagan, about California, about Ed's latest golf disaster. The audience laughed in all the right places. The first guest, a young actress promoting her new film, charmed everyone with stories from the set. Everything was running like clockwork. Then Johnny introduced Rodney. Our next guest needs no introduction. He gets no respect, but he gets all the laughs. Please welcome the great Rodney Dangerfield. The band played. The audience applauded. The curtain parted. Rodney walked onto the stage in his signature style, the rumpled suit, the loud red tie, those unforgettable bug eyes scanning the crowd. He waved. The audience roared. He sat down in the guest chair, adjusting his tie in that familiar nervous gesture everyone had seen 100 times. Johnny was grinning, ready for the onslaught of jokes he knew was coming. Rodney, good to see you. How are you? Rodney looked at Johnny. And for the first time in 47 appearances, he didn't have a punchline ready. Johnny, Rodney said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone on television. Something I swore I'd never say. Johnny's grin faltered. His host instincts kicked in immediately. He could sense when something was off, when a guest was veering away from the script. Okay, he said carefully. What's on your mind? Rodney's hands gripped the armrests of the chair. His eyes, usually wide for comedic effect, were now glistening with something else entirely. My real name isn't Rodney Dangerfield, he said. It's Jacob Cohen. And 35 years ago, I walked away from my family because I thought I was a failure. The studio went silent. Not the brief pause before a punchline. Real silence. Uncomfortable silence. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or not. Doc Severinsen lowered his trumpet. Ed McMahon's perpetual smile disappeared. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. Johnny's face changed completely. The practiced television smile vanished, replaced by something deeper. Concern, empathy, recognition that something real was happening. He leaned forward, elbows on his desk, hands clasped under his chin. Rodney, Johnny said softly, abandoning his host's voice entirely. Are you sure you want to do this? I have to, Rodney said, and his voice cracked. I'm 60 years old, Johnny. I've been lying about who I am for so long I can barely remember the truth anymore. And I'm tired. To understand what happened next, you need to understand who Jacob Cohen was. Jacob Cohen was born in 1921 in Babylon, New York. His father owned a small vaudeville theater that barely made enough money to keep the lights on. His mother cleaned houses. They were poor, not movie poor, real poor, the kind where you wear the same pair of shoes until they fall apart, and you eat the same meal 3 nights in a row because that's all there is. Jacob was funny. Class clown. Always making people laugh, even when they were yelling at him to shut up. By the time he was 15, he was writing jokes and selling them to local comedians for $1 apiece. By 19, he was performing in small clubs under the name Jack Roy. He was good. Not great, but good. He got small gigs. Made a little money. Enough to think maybe, just maybe, this could be a real career. Then he met Joyce Indig. She was beautiful, warm, believed in him when nobody else did. They got married in 1949. Had 2 kids, Brian and Melanie. Beautiful children. Jacob loved them fiercely. But comedy wasn't paying the bills. The gigs dried up. The clubs stopped calling. By 1955, Jacob Cohen was 34 years old with a wife, 2 small children, and a career that had gone absolutely nowhere. He worked as an aluminum siding salesman during the day and tried to get stage time at night. He was exhausted all the time. Behind on rent. Behind on everything. His wife worked 2 jobs. His kids wore hand-me-downs. One night, after bombing at a club in Newark, 15 people in the audience, 12 of them walked out during his set. Jacob sat in his car in the parking lot and made a decision that would haunt him for the next 3 decades. He couldn't do this anymore. He wasn't good enough. He was failing his family by chasing this impossible dream. The responsible thing, the right thing, was to quit comedy, focus on the aluminum siding business, be a proper provider. So he went home and told Joyce he was done with show business. He was going to be a full-time salesman. They'd be okay. He promised. What he didn't tell her was that he'd also decided something else. He was going to leave. Not immediately. But soon. Because every time he looked at his kids, he saw disappointment in their eyes. Every time Joyce smiled at him, he felt like a fraud. He was a failure pretending to be a husband and father. 3 months later, Jacob Cohen walked out on his family. No dramatic scene. No fight. He just left. Moved to a different city. Sent money when he could, which wasn't often. Avoided phone calls. Avoided responsibility. Avoided the suffocating shame of being a man who couldn't provide for his children. He told himself it was better this way. They'd be better off without him dragging them down. He was wrong, but he believed it absolutely. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. For 5 years, Jacob Cohen drifted. Different cities. Different jobs. Different versions of himself, each one trying to outrun the memory of the family he'd abandoned. He sold aluminum siding. He sold insurance. He sold anything anyone would pay him to sell. But comedy kept calling him back. Late at night in cheap hotel rooms, he'd write jokes in notebooks he never showed anyone. He'd watch other comedians on television and think about what he would do differently. He couldn't let it go, even though it had destroyed his life. In 1961, something shifted. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was turning 40 and realizing he was running out of time to become anyone. Maybe it was seeing his kids' names in a phone book one day and realizing they were growing up without him. Maybe it was just accumulated grief finally transmuting into rage. Jacob Cohen decided to try comedy one more time. But not as Jacob Cohen, the failure who abandoned his family. As someone new. Someone who could start over without the weight of his past. He changed his name to Rodney Dangerfield. He created a character, a perpetual loser who got no respect, who couldn't catch a break, whose whole life was a series of humiliations. It was armor disguised as vulnerability. He could talk about failure constantly without anyone knowing he was actually talking about himself. And it worked. Rodney Dangerfield became popular. Then famous. Then beloved. By the 1970s, he was a household name. He opened his own comedy club, Dangerfield's in Manhattan. He appeared on The Tonight Show regularly. He made movies. He became exactly what Jacob Cohen had dreamed of being. But Jacob Cohen's children grew up without a father. His ex-wife raised Brian and Melanie alone, working herself to exhaustion, explaining to confused kids why their daddy didn't visit anymore. They knew their father had become this famous comedian named Rodney Dangerfield. They saw him on television, making millions of people laugh. But he never called. Never visited. Never acknowledged them publicly. Because Rodney Dangerfield the character didn't have children. Jacob Cohen the failure had children. And Rodney couldn't let Jacob's past destroy what he'd built. Until tonight. March 1981. Sitting across from Johnny Carson on live television. "I have 2 kids," Rodney said, his voice thick with emotion. Brian and Melanie. They're grown now. 31 and 28. I haven't spoken to them in 26 years. Not since I walked out. The audience was completely silent. Some were crying. This wasn't comedy. This was confession. Johnny hadn't moved. His eyes never left Rodney's face. Why are you telling us this now? Because last month, my daughter, Melanie, she sent me a letter. Rodney reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. His hands were shaking. She sent it to my club. She said she'd been trying to find the courage to write for years. She said. His voice broke completely. She said she forgives me? And she wants to know if maybe, after all this time, I could be her father again. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. The control room was in chaos. Director Bobby Quinn was staring at the monitors, headset pressed against his ear, listening to NBC executives screaming questions. Is this planned? Is this a bit? What's happening? Producer Fred DeCordova stood behind Bobby, hand on his shoulder, watching Rodney Dangerfield cry on live television. Keep the cameras rolling, Fred said quietly. Don't you dare cut away. On stage, Johnny Carson stood up. He didn't plan it. Didn't think about it. He just stood, walked around his desk, and sat on the edge of it, closer to Rodney, abandoning the formal distance between host and guest. May I see the letter? Johnny asked gently. Rodney handed it to him with trembling hands. Johnny opened it carefully. His eyes scanned the handwritten pages. The cameras stayed on him as he read. You could see his jaw tighten, his eyes glisten. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and handed it back. Rodney, Johnny said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you want to see your children again? More than anything, Rodney whispered. But I don't know if I deserve to. I walked out on them. I chose comedy over being their father. What kind of man does that? A scared one, Johnny said simply. A man who thought he was doing the right thing by leaving. You were wrong. But that doesn't mean it's too late. The audience was completely absorbed. Not a cough. Not a whisper. 300 people bearing witness to something they never expected to see on a comedy show. Johnny looked directly into camera one. If Melanie Cohen is watching tonight, or if anyone knows her, please tell her that her father is ready to talk. That he wants to be in her life. That he's sorry. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. From the back of the studio, near the audience entrance, a woman's voice called out. Dad? Every head turned. The cameras swung. Johnny froze. A young woman stood in the back row of the audience seating. Late 20s, dark hair, wearing a simple dress. Her hands were clasped in front of her, trembling visibly. Rodney Dangerfield stood up from the guest chair so fast he nearly fell. His eyes locked on the woman. Melanie? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I sent you that letter 3 weeks ago. When I didn't hear back, I thought maybe you didn't want to see me. But then your club manager called yesterday and said you were going to be on Johnny's show tonight, and I thought I had to come. I had to see if... She couldn't finish. Rodney was already moving, stumbling through the audience aisle toward her. Johnny stepped back, giving them space. The cameras followed. Father and daughter met in the middle of the studio. Rodney grabbed Melanie and held her like he'd drown if he let go. I'm sorry, he sobbed into her hair. I'm so sorry. I was scared. I was stupid. I'm sorry. I know, Dad, Melanie whispered. I know. You're here now. That's what matters. The audience rose as one. Standing ovation. Not for comedy. For courage. For forgiveness. For second chances. Johnny stood at his desk, tears streaming down his face, making no attempt to hide them. Ed McMahon was openly weeping. Doc Severinsen put down his trumpet and applauded. When Rodney and Melanie finally pulled apart, Johnny invited them both to sit on the couch together. They held hands. Rodney met his grandson for the first time on television 2 weeks later. His son Brian appeared on the show a month after that. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Rodney Dangerfield never stopped doing comedy, but he stopped hiding. He talked about his kids in interviews. He brought them to movie premieres. He became Jacob Cohen again when it mattered. The letter Melanie wrote is framed in Rodney's old dressing room at Dangerfield's Comedy Club in Manhattan. Above it, a photo from that Tonight Show taping, father and daughter embracing while America watched.